Well, good afternoon, everybody that RSVP'd and arrived on time. Arthur Cunningham remotely. We're hoping to give you an overview of where we've gotten to at this point, but as you are aware, for about the last 2 years, the city's been involved in trying to develop an updated industrial pretreatment program mandated by the EPA. You skip to the next slide. We've met with all of you individually as a city. So you've met myself, William Vernon, Industrial Pretreatment Coordinator. Eric Fiedler, City Engineer, is here. Also with us today, who we're hoping you get a chance to meet, Heidi and Paula from Hoyle Tanner, who we have tasked with doing the bulk of the heavy lifting and all of the development of this industrial pretreatment program. And we have the honor of being one of those cities that has to do 2 separate industrial pretreatment programs. So we have a second one coming. Move to the next one. The why are we here is we have an outreach component to the IPP development. How we got here, we want to cover, and where we're going from here will be coming at the end. I'm going to do a little bit of the history, but Jared Sheehan's here. He knows a lot more of the history than even I do. What are the major efforts that we've already undertaken for development of the IPP, identifying industrial users, new headworks loading, new local limits. We're going to hand those slides off to Hoyle Tanner and let them go into detail. We got a brand new, updated, significantly expanded sewer use ordinance in progress. We'll end with a timeline of what we can expect, but we're hoping to go through these slides fairly quickly, so we just have more time for open discussion at the end. This slide isn't absolutely necessary. You're all very familiar with the PE's treatment plant, so I'm not going to go into what the plant's there. The reason I wanted to include this is just for illustration purposes. Built by and for the Air Force in '52, updated significantly over the years. Our current industrial user permitting program and our interim limits might have been based on the best available scientific and technical data at the time. But the plant's changed a lot over time. Our current permit was renewed in 2023. Our standards might have been based on our earlier permit standards, and the discharges to the plants have changed a lot over time. So this is a good chance to reboot the program or at least do a thorough audit of it. Next slide, please. So historically, there was no industrial user permitting program, no monitoring of discharge prior to the 90s. In the 90s, when we were asked to develop the permitting program, it was encouraged by DES, a little help from EPA. They did all the basic steps of identifying the potential users, met with them, produced an application, and I really put an asterisk to highlight the process as it evolved to what we have today was thoroughly based on 40 CFR Part 403, the general pretreatment standards. We had interim local limits, but it's mostly the pretreatment standards. Why do I put an asterisk by that? Because Part 403 also governs everything we've been required to develop for an IPP. So future permits, future permit applications, they're going to look very similar to what we already have. So next slide, please. Back one. So we already have these steps, the normal permit application issuance. You guys have the normal monitoring, sampling, record keeping, reporting requirements. Those are all pretty much going to stay the same. We've always managed to meet with y'all and make sure you have proper operation and maintenance. We have a surcharge program for excessive loads for high strength wastewaters. We've always had authority for inspection and sampling. We haven't often taken advantage of it unless there was an upset we had to follow up on. If we go to the next slide, you'll see the new program has additional sampling inspections mandatory. So we have to do, as a city, an annual inspection, fill out a checklist with y'all at each of your sites, and we have annual sampling as mandatory, where before it was optional. But you're going to find augmented legal authority, mostly in the enforcement sections, brand new local limits. So instead of using the general pretreatment standards, we have specific numerical discharge limits for this particular plant. Hoyle Tanner will go through more details in the updated list of industrial users. but you're gonna find similar permitting, on-site monitoring, record-keeping, reporting requirements. Next slide, please. I did note there's new program organization there, because previously the program had always been administered on the side of other people's duties. So it had always been done by the city engineer, the wastewater operations manager. Now we have an industrial pretreatment coordinator, brand new role created for the city, dedicated to administration of just this. The major efforts in developing an IPP, there's 9 prescribed chapters, there's many legs to it, but the biggest hurdles to cover would be these. Identifying every potential non-domestic discharger, finding out what they're sending to us, whether they're a significant industrial user, whether they're categorical, conduct a brand new headworks loading analysis on what's coming to the plant, what the plant's capable of processing, what its efficiencies are, and what's leaving. Developing the headworks loading and subtracting from it to develop the industrial load. Well, Tanner will go through that in a few. We have the words revision of the sewer use ordinance, but as it's grown from 12 pages to 65, it's a wholesale revamp, which was necessary. The older one did have all of our permissions to administer the program. It did not codify all the minutia that EPA requires us to have in there for this program. When I say that it's expanded to 65 pages, a lot of that is just your permit application, what has to go in. Your permit, what has to go in. That was never codified in our old ordinance, so now that's specifically in there. And then the enforcement response, we'll get into that in a later slide as well. Well, I'm going to turn this over and let Hoyle Tanner expand on this. I was involved in these steps, but they did all of the heavy lifting.
Thank you, WB. So I'm Heidi Marshall from Hoyle Tanner. And so the master list, one of the things that we needed to do is to figure out who were all of what we call non-domestic users in the city. And then who are those users that are in the P service area. And so we accomplished this through a series of different efforts. The plowing through a plethora of city records. And then we actually put 2 people in a car and drove every single street in the city and wrote down sign names and then went back and Googled and researched what those people were. And that started the campaign to call people if we couldn't figure out online what they actually did. And then from that, we distributed some what we called a phase 1 survey, and that phase 1 survey just asked for some very basic information. That information, again, what's a contact name and what's an email address? Unfortunately, many times businesses are very reluctant to even provide that information because they don't know how it's going to be used and how it's going to affect them. So when that happens and we don't have the information we need, it ends up resulting in what we call boots on the ground, and we need to go out and we need to knock on doors and try and look and see what these people do that don't want to share with us through paper or electronics what they do. Once we have that basic information, then Paula from Hoyle Tanner went through the list and tried to determine who do we care about? Like, who could be impactful to the treatment plant? Who may have some component of their business that meets what we call a federal categorical rule. So we're all going through everything to determine who needs a follow-up. So from that, we had what we called a phase 2 survey, and WB ended up hand delivering some of those surveys and boots on the ground going in some of those businesses to, again, determine if we really needed the information in the phase 2 survey, or if we had enough information from existing records and such that we didn't need to do that. Once we had the information back from the surveys, then Paula and her genius went through the whole list and we grouped everybody into different organized groups, which were organized by similar regulatory components. So what do these people have in common? What is their potential oversight schedule, quarterly, daily, monthly, whatever, and then what are we going to go from there? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paula to go on to explain more of the details of the new numbers and how we got to where we're at now.
Now we get to the good stuff. I'm Paula Boyle, Boyle Tanner and Associates, work directly with Heidi, Senior Environmental Engineer. So as Heidi mentioned, once we had this list of industrial users, non-domestic users, we wanted to know what type of pollutants did these discharges discharge to the Pease wastewater treatment facility. So we started to classify the users by what pollutants might be discharged. A brewery might discharge VOD, another facility might discharge metals. Really try to understand what pollutants might be reaching the headworks of the Pease wastewater treatment facility with the goal of figuring out what are the pounds of those individual pollutant parameters coming to the treatment facility. So that was our goal, to do the headworks loading analysis, which is required as part of developing the whole industrial pretreatment program. So basically what we wanted to do is figure out what's coming in, what's moving through the plant, what's leaving the plant and reaching the river, and how much of it lands in the sludge. And that's all related to some environmental criteria that we needed to make sure that the city and the Pease wastewater treatment facility were meeting. So I think you can go to the next slide, please, Stephanie. Oops. In order to do that, we did a complete screening of the influent at the wastewater treatment facility. It was a one-day screening of just checking to see what pollutants are coming into the treatment plant and see if we could marry that to what we knew industrial users were discharging. So we started to take a look at, okay, in a one-day screening, many of them were non-detect. Nothing's coming into the treatment plant for some parameter. For example, let's just throw out cyanide or some such thing. So if it wasn't coming into the plant on our screening, we could eliminate that for our full sampling program, which was a 5-day sampling program of the Pease influent, effluent, sludge, the septic receiving facility, and also domestic sources, or uncontrollable sources is what we really call it. Sources that aren't going to be permitted somewhere down the line as yet. I think we can go to even the next slide. Cindy, that'd be great. So what we do for it's called the Headworks Loading Study is, and this is where we get into a lot of math. The EPA has guidance and formulas for how do you calculate the maximum allowable loading that the Pease treatment facility can handle for each pollutant. And it's based on a number of criteria. One being, what is the discharge permit that the Pease treatment plant has to meet? It's called the NPDES permit. Another criteria is, what is the water quality that we're discharging to? And that's marine salt water for the Great Bay. We use water quality standards for that. We take a look at what can the treatment plant handle for inhibition? What would come into the treatment plant that might upset biological activity or cause trouble with any of the mechanical equipment? And then we also take a look at sludge, making sure that whatever comes through the plant and ends up in the sludge, the city can dispose of that sludge appropriately at the turnkey landfill. So we have to make sure that we meet those standards. So those are the environmental criteria that we're going to calculate this maximum allowable headworks loading on. There are other criteria that are really, really important as well. Taking care of the workers' health, safety in the sewers for things like hydrogen sulfide, corrosion, low pH. We always want to make sure we protect the workers. So that's another element that we look at when we're looking at the overall maximum allowable headworks loading. So for that, what we do, so we have all of our criteria, we're going to start crunching the numbers and come up with this calculation. But in order to do the calculation for maximum allowable headworks loading, we want to know what the removal efficiency is through the plant of these pollutants. So that's where we took a look at the influence, what's leaving, and what is the percent removal through the plant. That's all baked into the maximum allowable headworks loading calculation. So we crunch the numbers, and that's where it gets really fun because you can, you're really modeling the plant, which is great. So that's the proposed MAL, we call it, maximum allowable headworks loading. For each of those pollutants that we saw coming into the plant, or that we have to be careful that we can meet the environmental criteria, we calculated this MAL, and those are the numbers that you see there. EPA guidance suggests using a 10% safety factor to make sure we account for anything, any, data errors or what have you, to make sure that it's, we have some flexibility on the MAL. We always want to protect the plant for interference, pass through, and any sludge issues. After we took off the safety factor from the mall, we had to take a look at the users that we're not going to permit and leave some of the loading for them. And we were able to calculate that by doing some sampling in the collection system and coming up with the domestic loading or the uncontrollable loading of the plant to the plant. And we had to go back out and do a little more work on that. Our first go round of it, we needed to tweak it a bit and make sure that we really understood and had representative samples for the uncontrollable loading, which we did do. And that's what you see in the uncontrollable column. And then septage, we had part of our sampling program, we were sampling for septage for 5 days, taking a look at what the loads were coming into the plant. And we're going to save some of that loading because Pease wastewater treatment facility accepts septage. To figure out what's left to give to the industrial users, it's basically taking the proposed mall, take off the safety factor, subtract the uncontrollable loading, subtract the septage loading, and then you're left with what we have left to issue and give out to the permitted, significant, usually industrial users. So that's the point that the city's at now. Good news is there seems to be loading for what right now the existing users are giving us. So that's all good news in some way. And we're working a little bit on dividing that up now in permits. And WV will probably talk a little bit more about that on sewer use ordinance, but we are required now to put this mail into the sewer use ordinance as technically based local limits. So that's it in a nutshell. So there's more to it, but we'll just broad brush a little bit. Yeah.
You might recall when we did some of the uncontrolled sampling, we came to both Lonza and Cisco and did the split samples. You guys were involved in that specifically. Okay, our regulatory authority, we've had to significantly augment it. Our existing sewer use ordinance was adopted. That's a typo. I found out from city clerk today, it was actually 1971. You know, it's individual passage has been updated over time, but it gave us limited program implementation provisions, particularly in the enforcement sections. The new or updated sewer use ordinance strenuously adheres, as I wrote, strenuously adheres to the EPA model. It is strongly based on there. However, it is presently in the hands of a team of 4 city enforcement lawyers under another level of revision. So that's a good thing. It is. You know, you can't trust one lawyer to look it over. You need all. No, just kidding. I did go to law school myself, so I can make lawyers do it. No. I started the revision with the EPA model, and Portsmouth will become the 14th community in the state of New Hampshire with an EPA approved IPV program. So I took the best of the best from all 13 others. AI is just a plagiarism program. I'm your manual AI. I plagiarize from the best. I bullet in there that this is part of chapter 2, appendix 2A, specifically to let you know. There's a slide coming up in a few minutes where this is all going to go out to public comment, so you will have a chance to go through it line by line if you want to. It's going to be out there for public comment. Please skip to the next slide, please. Okay. This comes to enforcement response. How do I summarize this? It's EPA mandated we have a written enforcement response plan. It is our guide to enforcement. It's very prescriptive. It's in a very good way. It standardizes responses so that all industries and all discharges are treated equally. It also removes some discretion from me, Eric, and the people administrating this program's hands. So level 1, notice violation, we can still work with you, but if there's an egregious violation or a pattern of violations, we have to just connect with dots and go down the flow chart of the EPA approved ERP. So we don't have discretion as much. Can you go to the next slide, please? Here you go. So this is kind of looking ahead of what to anticipate as we submit this draft that's taken 2 years to develop and is just about ready to put on their desks. I'd love to have a visual and have one on the desk here for you, but I don't have 4 reams of paper to print it all and put it in front of you. They're anticipated to take 9 or more months to do their review. By the end of that review, they will put it out to an over 30-day public comment period. We'll be Federal Register notified. We'll reach out to people to let you know when the public comment period is open if you want. You know, after they give us their rounds of revisions and the public comments have been addressed, they'll approve the program, tell us to run with it and administer it. We'll actually have a short delay in that gap because the regulatory authority and the sewer use ordinance has to be in place before we administer it as written. And that can take a few months, the way our city council works. It might be as quickly as 1, but it's going to be a slight delay. Then we get program implementation. We're going to meet with you individually. Those of you that have permits that expire approximately when this goes into effect, 2025 timeframe, we'll present you with an updated user application and we'll start over. Those who have a permit that's not due to expire soon, if there's a discharge limit change, if there's a monitoring change, we might open your permit and amend them, or just do an amendment by letter and saying until your next permit is issued, here's what adjusts within your management scheme. And then we will have to come on site at least once annually for an inspection and do annual sampling. That used to be optional. That's not even mandatory of all significant industrial users, which both of you present are definitely in that umbrella. I'm sure there's a lot more I meant to cover, and I'm sure I should have introduced it with what is an IPP, but this is not the first round of outreach, and all of you have been very familiar for the last 2 years, so I didn't start from the basics on this one. Next slide, please.
Did you have that table that showed all the people that potentially would be permitted under this new one? There's just for Jared's information, there's a couple that.
We can share that, because we used to have in the Pease Tradeport area, only 6 permittees. That might grow by 1. And there used to be 3 classes of permits. There's now going to be 6. Although class 5 is more of a monitor only category where we don't actually issue them a permit, but we might inspect, sample, or otherwise keep tabs on them.
But in terms of like the changes, I think there's 2 dentists. And the dentists are required to file some like federal for the amalgam and stuff, so we just would get a copy of that. So some of that is not like it's more just additional information from them. And then there's some potential PFAS generators, so there'd be some monitoring at the.
Well, we listed Plain Sense, which is alpha flying, partially because one of their main operations in their giant hangar is washing. And the car washes are going to be heavily monitored. And as you probably know, any synthetic wax that causes water to beat up is a PFAS chemical. I suspect, and I do not know for a fact, but I suspect that Plain Sense might be doing similar processes. All of their wash water goes to a trench drain in the middle of their hangar, comes out their parking lot to an oil water separator, which is supposed to trap any drippings when they do their own oil changes. And they sometimes will drum up old fuel from aircraft, but you know, you hope the transfer process is clear, but they might still spill some drips. I did tour that site, and I do remember Green Seal or Green something was the name of one of their wash products. A Simple Green. And like you're familiar with Simple Green spray bottles, they had 55-gallon drums on it. Now, is that PFAS free? That one might be. I don't know what their other chemistry is. So we'll monitor them, and then Oil Tanner will advise us as we administer if we have follow-up questions. But if we do sample them and find that there's 0 PFAS discharge, can we remove them from future sampling? You know what I mean? Can we amend that list in the future? But I'm sure you want to know mostly how it can affect you guys specifically. And we've had one-on-one conversations with you all. Right now, because our existing permitting program, on the legacy permitting program, was so strongly based on the same standards that were required to have the new one written to, it should be almost seamless. You know, as we found with the headworks loading analysis, there wasn't ample capacity, but there was enough. Let me rephrase that. The scientific and technical data that your existing permits were written on was good data. You know, we were afraid we would find when we did the headworks loading analysis that a lot of things would change dramatically. There might be a couple parameters that have a restriction on them over what you have now. But in our analysis, and we can get into this today, we'll have more data in the future. And as the program gets approved, we're gonna have another one of these sessions. I know that Oil Tanner took all the discharge monitoring data that we've collected from you all monthly and took the last 3 years average. And there's actually been analysis, if this parameter from what they're currently permitted goes to this, how many times would they have been in violation in the last 3 years? And we found like 2 or 3 instances. You know what I mean? It would have been very seldom. But I don't have those numbers in front of me. But like I said, we like to open it up. You know, we're not sitting in a panel here. You got 2 Oil Tanner reps here. You got Eric Fiedler and myself. Open discussion, any questions you have, address them to any one of us.
So just another note too is, part of this, it's actually good that this is happening because we're doing the Ps, wastewater plant upgrade this time. So we sort of, for certain constituents, we sort of over allocated to some of the sort of users for like VOD and stuff like that. So we're doing some aeration improvements too. So we're also revisiting some of the capacity limits as well. So again, this is going to be evolving over time. So once we get the new stuff, then that'll inform permits and things like that too.
Things we didn't expound on today that we have to give Oil Tanner a lot of props for. I mean, that master list compiling is just a large legwork effort, but it's not just developing that list, it's developing the work plan of how to maintain it and keep it current. You know, I've talked to you, Jared, a couple times just to get your word on, do you know of anybody new that's moved into your neck of the woods? I'm trying to have a formal process built into our building permit and inspections team. Because somehow we can get a business move in, they've permitted it, you know, the utilities have moved in, they got water supply from DPW with a meter install. And they never once told us that there's gonna be a new wastewater discharge from this address. You might wanna find out what they're doing in this building. So that's one of the things that we need to, you know, get a lot closer tabs on.
And Jared, it might be something where we can set up periodic meetings, just like it is, every 6 months, like, hey, are there new tenants, anything that we should be aware of that we missed sort of in that tenant fit up process or something like that. So I think those type of coordination things would be really helpful.
Yeah, and you gave me the heads up on a couple that I've since gone back and visited, but then when I visited, I found out they only moved into a quarter of the building. These are 3/4 of the building is still empty, so there's very high potential of new tenants moving in. You know, that Optima Dermatology moved into CMS Media Group, they're only taking up a corner of the building.
Yo, Jared, just for your information too, so this is in our proposed like permit list. So really, those are the 2 dentists there. I think Great Bay Community College and the hospital, those both had prior lapse permits, so they could potentially impact it. So we'll reach out and work with them. These are the industrial ones with no permit. These are just basically just for us to monitor. So Teledyne will have a non-discharging one, and then there's the PFAS generation. So that's like annual sample.
Teledyne already has a categorical non-discharge.
So these are the ones that potentially are impacted. These really are no permit. This is more, we'll just watch them long term to see if there's any change to their process or something like that. But it's really, I think it's updating sort of the prior permits that lapsed and then double checking those and doing our diligence on the dentist type of thing.
And the one that's entirely likely to be new, but as we go and do an application with them, that's the Wentworth Douglas Hospital Complex, the 3 buildings there.
Yep.
They do not currently have a permit.
Right.
And I do not know what analysis was done of them when they moved in. I have no records. So we're gonna meet with them. We might ask them to fill out a permit application. We might at that time determine it's not really required, but we won't know until we get there. So they're definitely on our list and on our radar until then.
But I think we'll coordinate with you just to let you know that we'll be outreaching with them eventually. But again, though, there's a time frame for this. We're proposing these. There's all those time frames before we really engage with them to start any sort of additional outreach. So.
Yeah, between the EPA approval process and the sewer use ordinance adoption process, we're talking a minimum of a year from now before we get to where we're implementing everything new. But again, the transition, do I want to call it a transition at all? It's going to be a seamless meld. Because the existing plans already pretty much comply with what we already have. There might be minor modifications to existing ones, but it's not like we're gonna like immediately invalidate what you've always done and make you start from scratch something brand new. Our program was already pretty robust and pretty close to what the EPA is making us develop it into.
That's, it's just that we're just gonna keep on progressing and, I mean, it's been good working with Lonza and Wicked Weed and stuff. I feel like your programs are pretty well evolved, and it's really just gonna be minor modifications, so we'll sort of changes to that process.
So just this, the purpose of this is just to make sure that we put it out there in the public. Again, it will live on YouTube forever. And so,
Oh, yeah. But the big point is like, this is outreach that, we're providing to anyone who potentially be impacted. This is to show that these things are technically based. There was a process to do this. This isn't just us pulling it out of nowhere. We did our due diligence. We had Oil Tanner. We had a lot of people involved here to try to make sure that this is robust, it's defensible. We're not just trying to be arbitrary about how we do our business. So I think that's the big point of this is now that we have WB, we have basically people that are dedicated to doing this. Like we'll try to be as responsive, consistent and all those type of things in this project. But we're also willing to work. This isn't the point of us being the big bad city. We're trying to be collaborative with this, but this is really just to make sure that we can treat and we can convey the waste effectively and not nuke the environment or have upsets to impact other basically users at PDA and things. So,
Yeah, and I didn't do an introduction to say what's the EPA approval process. Yes, it is, as they say, they're approving a document we've written. However, it's also kind of a misnomer. In a way, they don't have the manpower to write a 1,000-page document for every community. This is really an EPA mandated program. As if they hand it down to us, we're just doing the writing for them because they don't have the manpower to do it. So they call it an approval process, but it means our legacy permitting, which I found is very similar and robust in its own right. We can call that the local permitting. Some people want to call it our informal process, which is now formalized. It's gone from being our local permitting program to a mandated rubber stamped one. And it takes a lot of discretion out of our hands. We want to make modifications that lacks any restriction. We can't make those ourselves. We have to go back to the EPA and ask for a modification to the approved plan. So it's more federal oversight than we have had. And again, I didn't do a good introduction of what it might be, but the city's never been required to have this before because our plants are small. Collectively, were we over 5 million for the last 20 years? Potentially, they could have imposed this before, but realistically, the threshold was a 5 million gallon a day discharge. So that $100 million upgrade to Pierce Island is what really got the ball rolling to trigger the EPA to want us to do this. And I'm kind of surprised Portsmouth didn't have one much earlier when Merrimack had one before us. Jaffrey had one before us. We are the 14th, community in New Hampshire to do one of these, but we're also the first since like 1980. So nobody's done a new one of these programs from the ground up in a lot of years. So even the EPA reviewer is kind of intrigued to see how this process is going to go because in their career they haven't tried to approve a new one of these in a long time.
It's funny though, I was just saying, most of this is actually the Pierce Island treatment requirements, like the capacity reasons are because we're treating less stormwater. We're gonna get away from that. I mean, we're doing like, 40 million of projects right now, just on like getting rid of CSOs and stormwater out of our system, so it'll get better as we go. But
so there'll be another meeting, once EPA approves the document and the local limits. We come back and we say, these are the numbers that EPA has approved, and this is how we're going to handle them. I suspect that we'll be meeting with you individually before that meeting, so there'll be no blindsiding. The most successful meeting is when everybody goes in and we already know and everybody understands that this isn't Portsmouth saying you have to do something. This is EPA saying Portsmouth has to do it. And local regulation is far better than federal regulation. So it's good that you have Portsmouth doing this. If Portsmouth didn't have a program and there were certain criteria, EPA could regulate the facilities directly. We are working with a community in Vermont right now where the state of Vermont regulates the facilities. And the community is trying to take it back from the state of Vermont such that they have a little bit of flexibility. It's very frustrating for these people. One of the people makes the little cookie dough that goes in ice cream from cherries, and so they're very important. You can't have, good ice cream without their product. But again, local regulation is far better because there's flexibility and compliance schedules that can be more tailored to what people have the capacity or ability to achieve, and not just, okay, it says this is what.
And what we do and what we are proposing is like, the headworks loading is the mass loading, right? That's an aggregate loading, and then we as a city are allocating that effectively, right? So it's just and the goal of it was to allocate it so that we kind of maintain our existing markets. If there's little modifications, it's because we just did not left, and it's really on the salt bite, I think was really the one that was more. So we're trying to give you guys allocations similar to what you already have so that it wouldn't impact any of your process. But I don't think it really will, but that's where we have discretion. It's like, well, does Lonza get a little bit more, or does we get more, or does some other industrial user? And that's where that'll constantly be evolving based on sort of the needs of the.
Is PDA fully built out? I know we've got a couple of lots that are
Yeah.
already ground, so you have to hedge a little bit to future growth in the area. You know, but for the most part, we're allocating the bulk of it because it's a small plant. You know, 1.02 million, whatever. You know, it's hard to hedge too much for the future. It's a small plant. So we're allocating the vast majority of what we calculated that's available. Come future, people are gonna have to pare back a lot more and take the notes a lot more. But
When we presented what we thought should be a reserve, the city came back and said, no, we're not reserving that much more. These people need this allocation now.
Because we knew that we had the project in process where that would give us ability to that
Gain some
project gains us back capacity. So that was the goal, right? So we were trying to allocate as much as we could, so we didn't have to, and again, because it's administered by EPA, anything we change, we have to make sure. And less. So it's better to try to get those numbers down as best we can. Yeah, but we're gonna revise this as we go. I think we have annual reports to the EPA now, so there's a little bit more reporting on our parts.
Are there ever any, is there any documented 15-year, 30-year plan of increasing loading capacity at these?
Well, we were going to increase our capacity. We have a permit that's been just updated with a higher capacity, but that would take additional infrastructure improvements.
Right.
Right, these are SBRs. I mean, we can optimize them, we can get a little bit more, but I think with this project, we're gonna max out as much air grids that we can put in there, as big blowers as we can. So we're kind of limited on the treatment capacity. That being said, there are plans to handle sludge and other things, so there's potential that we can get more back, but those would be not in, we don't have a plan.
And the technology is changing every day on your end and their end.
Yeah.
And so especially there's a lot of work in process on brew treatment technologies and best management practices, right?
And you know your neighbors, that community is changing. The Pease wastewater treatment plant only services a fully commercial and industrial area. There's no residential. And what there was for non-domestic discharge is drying up. COVID showed all the office buildings that you didn't have to move back to your office after work from home. So you go to the corner of Grafton Road, you got the giant big, what's the office right now? Yeah, bottom line is they moved to a small unit because nobody came back after COVID. That's happened out there. Why do I mention that? As new tenants move in, there's more industrial, more laboratory, less office. So the waste characteristics as more tenants move into Pease, we have to have some allocation for them.
Well, our Portsmouth office is overflowing, Manchester is just.
First was first then.
Peas is, everybody actually parking, there's a nice space.
Cool, is there any questions? I know we talked about this a bit, so there's, I think probably we've answered those at other venues, but.
Nothing off the top of my head. I mean, I appreciate the cooperation and people who come and meet with you, work with you, and sharing, going over. So we'll continue to have a communication with you. And
I know I'm in your cell phone, you get my card, so anything that needs to go, even if it's a question for Eric, you can come straight to me, because I take good notes and write emails and remind them to check email.
That's the other thing too, is when this goes to public, for public comment, we'll definitely notify you, but we'll definitely encourage you, your staff, if you have legal teams, if you have any technical staff that wants to weigh in on this, that's a good idea.
And we're gonna keep resuming our quarterly meetings with yourself, but we're proposing new biannual meetings with yourself, because that last meeting was a really good one.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
we're gonna propose that we keep
so
those.
a lot of your new practices are like excellence, right?
Yes, we were really happy to see when you sent that, all that's good stuff. And if our legal team wasn't so tied up in revising our sewer use ordinance right now, they would have already signed off on the letter that we're giving you. But that's gonna take a while, because we really need them to finish the sewer use ordinance first.
So how will we be notified about comment period opening?
We'll learn.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gonna be in the front record, we'll.
Yes.
Yeah.
We got,
Cause it's
sure, we
really,
got internally to.
I mean, the big ones are you and Cisco, or Wikileaks, so that's the. Yeah, can't, sorry, I keep on saying Cisco.
No, my daughter's not
Saying
saying
Cisco.
It's still the Cisco.
Still the Cisco process.
Cool. Well, I think.
That's, is there a new name for the?
Yeah, we could be.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's I can give you the whole history. Who owns what and who leases what to do.
Interesting.
So we do appreciate you guys coming out, and
Yeah.
the whole goal is to try to make sure we're kind of, everyone's appraised with our progress.
Yeah.
So I think Arthur had a comment, he asked, he raised his hand, but then he put it down. Arthur, did you have a comment, question?
He took himself off mute, so
Just giving us a high five. Excellent.
it's the sound of it.
No?
Apologies, Arthur, no sound is coming through.
Oh, he made it, so. All right. Well, if he has any comments or anything,
Yeah.
feel free to pass them along.
Or
Yeah, I'm sure they.
put your comment in the chat, maybe?
Yeah. Either way, should be texted me. I mean, we just chatted like a week and a half ago, right?
Yeah.
The sooner you ask questions, the easier it is for us to incorporate your questions or comments into the EPA submittal.
Yeah.
Or to append what we've
Oh, yeah,
submitted.
wait, let's- let's see. So Art Cunningham is asking, will the method and steps used to calculate the maximal allowable headworks loading for BOD and total nitrogen be included in public documents?
Yes. It's in that report. It's in that.
Chapter 3 of the IPP, when it goes out to public comment, is the full local limits, and it has hundreds of pages of appendices, including the calculations that were used.
And an example.
Raw data.
Yeah.
How it was calculated and sort of like, so essentially a lot of it, it backs up from something, you define the criteria, the effluent water is in, environmental water quality is in inhibition or something. You define the criteria and then you back up to, this is what the limits are.
So this will be available in the
Second code base, and all that.
public comment period?
Correct. And it's likely once, we could always work the top, I mean, if you want the example, there's not that hard to.
I'll tell you
Once
this.
we have the draft finalized, I think we can. Is that a problem if we do that?
No, I think probably meeting with them
Okay, so-
and going through it, maybe
We're
not
planning-
just shipping out the whole thing, but having a meeting,
Yeah.
going through it.
So we're planning on submitting it, we're obligated at the end of the month, so once we get that draft finalized, then we can sit down and like talk through it on that.
Yeah. I think that's the ideal.
And going back to the question of where it's available, everything's available. It's all public information documents.
Yeah.
There's actually one small provision in chapter 9 and in the SUYA ordinance based on confidentiality, that unless you stamp something confidential, when you provide it to us, it becomes public record once you provide it to us.
Yeah.
Because anything municipal that we work on that goes to federal approval is public document.
And wastewater constituents is
Oh, yeah.
not allowed to be called confidential.
Yeah, so what you report to us monthly, if a citizen comes to me and asks for it, I basically have to show it to them. So if somebody wants to audit your discharge.
Sure, no, I understand.
I think that's the only thing.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if you do come into significant non-compliance, you're gonna get pilloried because I have to publish your name in the newspaper, which is so archaic. But EPA is trying to revise our language to allow us to post it on our website or something, but they haven't approved that yet, so the guidance documents, the Clean Water Act from 1981, the guidance documents from 83. Yes, I have to annually publish your name in the newspaper as a public ridicule.
And that
Yeah.
creates significant angst for the procurement coordinator because there's usually business loss associated with that publishing. So, I know in Paula and my history, we call people like, if you have some bad samples, we call you, get 10 more samples to make sure that in the net calculations, you aren't in violation of the end.
And don't worry, a 1 month, you blew one limit by 2%. That's not significant non-compliance. You're not gonna publish for 1 month.
No. Do your sampling early in the month so that you have time if you have any monthly limits to fix it, get your results back and fix it.
You sample pretty frequently.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, but thank you.
Mhm.
At the same time that the, you know, those calculations are available, are the like proposed changes to our permits? Is
Yeah,
that part of it
because
as
the
well?
proposed allocation, it will be,
It's all in there.
it'll be in there as well, so we can reach out, we wanted to set up a meeting with both of you, we can do it individually and say, hey, this is what we're seeing here, and this is the impacts. I think there's really no impact for you guys, other than,
Well, they-
we weren't monitoring certain
No,
constituents.
they monitor sulfide, they don't have a discharge limit. So they might get a new discharge limit.
Yeah, ours is,
Oh, you got 1
One.
milliliter,
but
okay.
That's fine.
So it might have been nitrogen, it might have been TN that you monitor, but don't have a numerical limit. So it might be nitrogen that will gain a numerical limit.
And then it's, I think, it's a change for you.
Yeah, I know we had time.
And you want to tweak it over it too.
Yeah, and that was my mainly, I mean, we already know that there's been, the whole pipe's been replaced and everything like that, so.
Yeah.
That's one of those, it's but it's something that we will work on, is it a mass based limit or is it a concentration too, that's.
Yeah, which we talked about in sort of scrolls out in our next phase for renewal.
Correct, and that's what it would be, because really our headworks loading is mass based.
Your new screening comes in handy because there might be revisions to the billing structure for the BOD TSS, but the allocations are gonna go down there. But I didn't bring it up because you're allocated a ridiculous amount, like 1,200 pounds a day.
Yeah.
And it might come down to 750, but for the last 3 years, you've been at an average of 450. Like you're not using, a portion of it, so even if we brought it down in a next generation permit, it's not gonna affect you, because you never go near that amount and.
It's almost like the predecessor for the treatment,
Yeah.
like, as you.
But that's the new screen, gonna get some of that, this way.
What's it? Oh, yeah.
What you signed, Trina? They upgraded from the simple screen to the, what is the belt press now?
Rotating drum screen. What's up, Peter?
Yeah, sure, it's actually, it's not a drum screen, it's just a, it's a belt screen.
We wrapped it up
So
and now
it's
we're just
kind of
doing, we
a-
planned a quick session and now we're just gonna run it.
Yeah, so it actually just, when it's kind of goes over again, there is a scraper for like, it is really coated like
Yeah.
solids. Most part, it just sprays it off with,
Oh, nice.
you know, low volume but high pressure water and then augers it and dewaters it.
Nice.
So
Yeah, the unit's
it's
pretty
crazy because like, you know, we fill these dumpsters with just such wet